And welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode, I've got a very fun project planned. We're going to be making a lot of Damascus, using the big hammer, using the press, using everything. So I've got to build a wild pattern, and this pattern that I'm planning on doing is something I've had in my head at this point for years. I think I designed this pattern sometime around 2 to 2.5 years ago, and so I'm thrilled to finally have the perfect project to get to execute that on. Before we light up the forge, let's talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. I've been using Squarespace for almost 5 years now. I've had a continually easy to use, low maintenance, affordable option to have a landing page for people who are trying to find me on the internet for years. It was easy to set up. I was bad at using the computer and internet then. I'm still pretty bad at it, but they make it so easy to set up a beautiful website. It's just crazy. They have all kinds of easy to use pages for galleries and portfolios. Very easy to sell products through a Squarespace website. They've got member only areas on the Squarespace. It's all very, very easy. And it's really important if you're a professional or even a high level hobbyist at anything to have a place that people can look you up and find a gallery of your work. And having a professional looking place for someone to land and see your work and then be able to contact you is incredibly important. And now when you guys go to squarespace.com/Will Stelter, you'll get 10% off your first purchase or a website domain when you use code Will Stelter. With that, let's jump back in and get that forge fired up and make some fun steel. So the blade for this project is a very curvaceous, lots of lines, lots of movement in the actual blade itself. And so I wanted a pattern to reflect that. I initially thought about using this bar of steel right here, which is a bar that I made a couple months ago with my friend Seth Lopez, but I decided I need something to suit the project a little better. So I've had this pattern planned for quite some time now, and it starts off with W's. And the way that you get to W's from straight layers. To start, I'll tack the steel together with a weld, bring it up to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, and whack it together under the big hammer. You round out the bar. That gives you layers go like this. And from there, you squish it down on the end. And so your onion looking layers here get squished down into what we call the C shape. From the C shape, we stack that up and it gets turned into our W's. I think for this pattern, I'll do 2 different layers of C's, one layer a little bit thinner than the other layer, and that should give us some really interesting activity in the actual bar itself. Now in reality, I'll be starting off with 11 layers. And so W's are kind of hard to quantify in layers, but generally I say layers of W's, meaning that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers of stacked C's in here. I'd call that 8 layers of W's. Once we have our billet looking like this, we will square it down into about 5/8 inch stock, and we'll have 2 bars here. So we'll have our 2 bars like so, and that pattern travels throughout the end of the bar. And that means that no matter where I cut it on this bar, I'm going to be able to see that C shape. So if I cut it right here, it's going to look the same as it does right here, as it does right there, as it does right there. So that bar, that pattern travels throughout the bar itself. Moving back to our pattern right here, we've got 2 of these bars, and I'm going to twist one right hand and one left hand. What that'll look like is like this. Before we grind in too much, we'll have our lines running down the steel. We want to match those twists up so that they're looking really good, really tight, and that'll mean that the twisted steel will almost look like a mosaic pattern because we'll have these kind of sections, these explosions lining up. That's going to be a really, really nice look. It doesn't look like a random pattern. It looks intentional, which is what we want on this project. So once we have our 2 twisted bars stuck together, now things are going to get interesting. Multi-bar, this pattern right here has been done for thousands of years. It's very popular with the Merovingian Franks, with the Vikings, with everybody. Everybody loves multi-bar. It's still a very, very popular pattern. But why stick to plain Jane regular old multi-bar when we can make things a little bit more interesting? Because we have 2 bars here, one right hand, one left hand, what we're able to do is cut corner to corner on it and give it the old switcheroo, a little flip-flop. What we'll be left with then is a tall triangle of multi-bar. We will have our right hand twist our left-hand twist. On the other side of the core, we will have another left-hand twist and a right-hand twist. So that's going to look really, really nice, but obviously this is nothing to be able to forge a blade out of. That's just a weird triangle. So we need to add an element to the outside. My original thought was I'd probably just end up forging together and building up some 80 CRV2 or another high-performance steel like that, but then I thought it'd be really nice to add some kind of shimmery element to let the light play off of, something with some chatoyance to it, which is the act of light playing and bouncing around. I've got a bar of 500 layer, mostly dark steel that I'd like to use for this, and I think what I'll do is ladder pattern that bar before I add it on. And so if I have a bar that's big, I want it to be bigger than my multi-bar pattern and wider by a good bit. And then what I'd like to do is cut it, not quite from corner to corner. I don't want it quite cut like that. I want to leave a little bit of room on either side. Obviously it's going to be better than this, but what that'll allow us to do is then match it. So this will be our laddered bar here. So we'll have ladder running this way, and since it's such a high and dark pattern, it'll have a lot of movement and chatoyance to it, but that'll leave us with a bar looking like this. And so we'll have our shimmery ladder pattern on the outside and our bold explosion multi-bar on the inside. So I've got, theoretically, the pattern elements built. I've got my ladder pattern for the outside, and I've got my twisted bars for the inside. The only problem is that I don't think this is enough steel. It's ended up being quite small, which I'm not thrilled about, and yeah, so I'm gonna restart. I'm gonna start with all of this steel. This is about 6 pounds of steel right here. I should be able to get up to 500 layers on this pretty dang quick. And so, unfortunately, this wasn't enough, but with 2 welds, I think I'll be able to get up to 500 layers on this guy, which is gonna be good. So, let's make it happen. Power hammer. The way that ladder pattern is done is by either grinding in and then forging back down, or forging in and grinding back down rungs into the pattern. This basically exposes the topography in a very linear way on the bar and brings those layers up to the surface. I ended up going up to 920 layers rather than 500. It should be a little bit more chatoyant-y, and it'll still look awfully nice. So with both of those pattern elements done, it's time to chop them up to their weird angles and forge weld them back together. So I've got my 4 pieces to compose my final billet. I've got my 2 920 layer edge bars that'll sit like so. And I've got my 2 pieces of multi-bar that'll sit in my core like so. First things first is I'm going to tack everything together, tack my ends, tack it in the middle, make sure I've got everything lined up and looking good. And then I'm going to go through very lightly and just lay down a real thin layer of MIG bead on my edge here. I wish I had a TIG welder, but I don't. And so I'm going to have to use MIG bead and then grind off a lot of it. I just want enough to seal out the oxygen from getting in there, basically. I think I may end up doing a fish mouth weld on the end of the bar. So a fish mouth is basically cutting a triangle out of the end of the bar and then forge welding it back together so that the edges of the bar meet in a very symmetrical way. But I don't want to stop there, because then what we would be left with on our blade is just a regular old tapering triangle of steel, which isn't particularly interesting in my opinion. And it doesn't quite match the flowy shape of our blade. And so what I'd like to do to make this thing a little bit more interesting and to match the curves of the blade is to do some cutouts on the sides of our steel. So with that, let's get to cleaning up some material and throw this sucker in the forge. Well, I am pretty thrilled with how this pattern looks. It is just swell, if you ask me. I got the exact activity that I was wanting of that kind of flamey, you know. I think it looks great. It looks exactly like my drawing, And I thought of something else while I was playing around with this pattern. Basically, what this is gonna look like in my mind is kind of like a dragon's tongue. It'll start tapered and it'll have some nice movement to it, just like the classic rendition of dragons. My thought is, I need to add more material on here, and so I've got a couple options. I've got the rest of the multi-bar billet. I could forge that down and wrap it around as edge bars, but that kind of doesn't really suit the theme of the knife, and not to mention there's a spot in the middle there where the pattern doesn't really line up. And so I'd like to avoid that and save it for something else down the road. Next option is to take some just plain Jane 1085 high carbon steel and forge weld that onto the edge. That would mean that we have black along our whole border, and then kind of captured inside that picture frame is our nice high layer and dragon's tongue looking pattern. But far and away the hardest and most complicated thing that I could do right now is add something else that's going to complement the pattern that's in there already. And that's what I want to do. I want to add dragon's teeth around the outside of the bar. And the way that I'm going to do that is by taking big stack of 15 and 20, forge welding it all together. That will be the white teeth. And then I will slap that together with some dark material. I'm not sure if I want to use Damascus or just plain high carbon steel yet. I'll see how big my billet is when I get there. But when I forge it onto a bias, it'll give me triangles, and when I stack those up along the edge, I'll have teeth that run around the perimeter of my billet and look like a whole dragon's mouth. I think it's going to be a super, super nice conclusion to this whole dragony face theme. So with that, a couple quick announcements before we end it. First off, huge thank you to everyone who purchased a shirt, hat, or Zippo, or supported the Come Hell or High Water Flood fundraiser for Montana. We ended up raising something like $113,000 for Montana flooding. Amazing job by my Montana Knife Company. They really got the word out in just a wonderful way. They did an awesome job. I'm very happy that I got to partner with them on that to make that happen. Now don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, do all of that fun stuff, and stick around for the next episode wherein I'll turn this piece of steel, and maybe some more depending on how it turns out, into a just killer, wild Bowie knife blade. Make sure you check out the merch on the website. You can also check out my Instagram for more up-to-date stuff. I'm a lot more active on Instagram as far as like day-to-day around the shop, just chilling, more casual kind of stuff. It's an awful lot of fun. I also live stream on there pretty frequently. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, go check it out on the gram. Huge thank you to all of you for sticking around to the very end of the video. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.